All right, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Leadership Been Live podcast with your host, Ricardo Rice, and my co-host,
Simone Sheree.
All right, so we are back with the man of the hour. We have to bring him every season because there's so many dumpster fires. We don't know what to focus on. But those that do not know, I'm going to let him introduce himself because he's just that.
How y'all doing? I'm attorney Gerald Griggs, 13th president of the Georgia NAACP and overall troublemaker.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. That's
yeah.
If you are on social media, you've seen a post from him, whether he did it or whether somebody else did it, because he's the voice. Like, he's the voice. That's why I have to have him every season, because without it, we just kind of talking about stuff, and he comes in and is like, no, we need to zero in on this. So that is why he's here. We can zero in and avoid all these dumpster fires that they keep setting, so we'll look there, look there, look there. All right, Simone, what were we talking about previously?
I mean, we have a lot to catch up on, and a lot of it is the same, unfortunately. So I think the last time we got a chance to talk to you, we talked a lot about access to the ballot, access to the ballot box. Of course, talked about policing, safety, public safety, community safety. We talked a lot about the city of Atlanta in particular, healthcare access. At the time, we talked about Grady, and Grady being really the only level 1 trauma center left available. So we went over the entire agenda, right, for the state NAACP, which I think we should do again. But I also think we could just kind of talk about maybe impact real quick of federal government, in particular, like the BBB recent impacts to the state of Georgia. We were just getting into how expensive we know that this is going to be for Georgians who use the exchange for the Affordable Care Act. Healthcare, again, is always critical. It needs to be affordable. It needs to be accessible. Can we just maybe even start there? Just kind of talking about what impact the administration has had on Black Georgians and Black Georgia families.
Like, what are you seeing in the streets? What are you seeing? Because stuff is passed, but what does it look like now that stuff has been passed?
So currently, people aren't feeling it yet because many of the things in the big bold lie, that's what I call it, are set to take place in 2026 after the midterms. But what you will see is a dependency on the state government because they're going to cut almost $12 billion in funding to the state of Georgia. And if you know anything about the state of Georgia's budget, I think it's around 40 to 50 billion. And so that's at least a fourth of the money coming down from federal government. So you're going to see cutbacks in education, cutbacks in healthcare. You're going to see cutbacks in so many things that the average everyday Georgian will feel it, but they won't know where it's coming from. But it's coming from the big bold lie, as I call it, or the big beautiful bill that basically is a hand up to billionaires and taking away from working class folk.
100%. When he's talking about the tax cuts, which we did very briefly get into, we went over some of those, the estate tax increase and business tax, like the permanent lower corporate tax rate, all those different tax cuts. And they always like to lead, I feel like they always like to lead with and mention just this general lower tax rate, like the increase in the standard deduction for everybody. They try to make it seem like but this is very much a bill that is slanted towards the wealthier you are and the more income that you generate through business, right? So like not wage income. Is there a disconnect for that for our community that you can see? Like when you're talking to people, and we hear them talking about lowering taxes for everybody, does that ring true for us? Because I feel like there's a huge difference between being a worker and a business owner. But I'm wondering, like, is he persuasive to people? Like, do people think like, oh, okay.
I think his messaging is so elementary that people buy into it. So when you get maybe a $200 tax cut, which is set to sunset as opposed to the permanent tax cuts for corporations, people are like, oh, he's lowering taxes. And the real conversation is, how is he lowering the taxes and what programs are they cutting that are beneficial to you? In your previous conversation podcast, you were talking about Medicaid and Medicare and talking about, nursing homes and care facilities and things like that. Somebody who's had experience with that. You need to understand that when your parents are aging out and you don't have the ability to provide for an in-home nurse, that's going to be cut.
Right.
So the government's not going to be paying for that. When we're talking about Atlanta still only having one level 1 trauma center and they're closing more rural hospitals, now there's going to be even less funding for the exchange and pathways, which I was just listening to a commercial on the way over here about Georgia Pathways. And they added the work requirement to get many of this government assistance, which in Georgia, they started that program and enrollment was at like 5%. So when we have this robust conversation about policy, I think our community misses it. But still focus on that 6th grade elementary messaging that's coming from the White House and be like, oh, he's trying to help us. No, he's trying to cut your education. He's trying to erase your history. He's trying to make it seem like we're going to a meritocracy when really it's DEI for the very wealthy.
For sure. That is a good point, because Georgia did not expand coverage through its Medicaid program for low-income adults. It's not the only state who's done that, but we are the only state with like our type of work requirement that's like the 80 plus hours a month, or the like include volunteer work or like other things like that. And I do think we have like the lowest rate, even though we spend, I think they said maybe out of the $100 million we spend, maybe 20 million is direct services. And there's a lot of money spent on marketing. I mean, a lot of the money is not actually spent on delivering the service itself. And it just seems like these hurdles or these like barriers that they're creating to restrict it, it just makes it more administratively tough. It doesn't make it more effective. It doesn't make it reach more people, doesn't make it help more people. Like the money then it does become waste. So then I feel like if you look back at it, you can say, oh, well, look, like this is not even like a good program. But it's all the restrictions in it that have made it so difficult for people to access it.
Well, I think that's my fear when we talk about, like you said, the messaging that has been so dumbed down, because we know kids and adults are light years behind. The fact that they're gravitating to it, and the thought about education, like now with me being a teacher, it's like when he cuts funding for education, which he has gotten the approval to fully dismantle the Department of Education. I guess in my head, and I want to do research, like, are we talking about, I think of the interventionist programs, the one that directly affects our kids, interventionist, special ed programs, things of that magnitude. I think that's where a lot of the federal money comes from, is to fund those kinds of programs. And without those programs, it's a scary thought, because I see our kids when I go to class every day, and like they're 2 and 3 grade levels behind. And once you get to a certain point, it's just like private tutors, interventionists, special ed have less impact. So I worry about that part of it, especially now that he has to go ahead to just dismantle the education department. So I don't know. This big, beautiful lie just sets us back. But I guess my curiosity is, y'all just had y'all convention, right?
Yes, sure.
What was on the agenda? Like everything. What was on the agenda?
So everything was on the agenda. We had a lot of seminars and a lot of speeches about how we're going to respond, because this is going to affect every single state in the union. And so each state has a different pathway. Georgia's particularly situated in a way where, when you cut federal funding, you already heard the governor saying he's not going to increase spending limits. So you're going to see that impact, where you have other states like California where the state is going to fund, or states like Maryland or New Jersey where the state is going to fund. So we talked a lot about that at the convention. We talked a lot about litigation, because the best way to push back on this is through litigation. And so we talked about what's happening in Memphis, Tennessee, with the suing of the superconductors that are the data centers are pumping that in South Memphis. We talked about some other lawsuits that are coming down the pipe. And so we're going to be proactive with litigation, but we also talked about being reactive to the cuts that's going to come out of the big bold lie.
Okay. But the course thing is an issue too, because are we starting to lose federal judges, especially as they pass that one that you can't pass a federal law if you're like a state judge, that you can't stand a federal.
See, that's the interesting thing about messaging. The judge actually said, the Supreme Court said, it has to be a class action. So a week later after that ruling, I saw that there was a class certification of a class action and then a nationwide injunction. So we think ultimately birthright citizenship will be fine. Yeah. What Trump does a lot is try to make these grand statements prior to litigation, and then people lose sight of the actual litigation. So if you read what the Supreme Court said, yes, it sided with him initially, saying that district court judges can't issue nationwide injunctions unless they certify a class. And oh, by the way, the district judge was listening and certified a class. So birthright citizenship, the attack on that has been forestalled. It's been enjoined. I think ultimately he will lose on the merits, because 14th Amendment is clear on that.
What about affirmative action? And what about like recent rulings that just like, what impact do those have on our civil rights? Like, do you believe we're in a weaker place? No,
I don't. And, when we talk about that particular ruling, I think that's why it's important for people to actually read the rulings. The Supreme Court said that affirmative action is still constitutional. The admissions plan from Harvard and UNC were not narrowly tailored. That's why they struck them down individually.
Okay.
But the rule that comes out of Bakke and Goddard versus Bowling is still good law in that as long as the race-based decision is narrowly tailored, there's a sunset provision of no more than 20 years, and it goes to a compelling government interest, you can use race as a determining factor in the determination on whether you get into undergrad with admissions decisions. So I think, again, he does a great job at this 6th grade messaging, but if you peel it back with the experts, you see that it's smoke and mirrors.
Do you see, though, actors responding to that out of just fear? Like, even
Absolutely.
if it's just fear of negative attention or fear of wasting time going back and forth with the administration or the threats that he may make about what he may do, even if he hasn't done it yet. Because I feel like one of the things we were talking about so much with previously with Sarah was so many institutions just saying, well, let's get rid of this, let's get rid of that, no more this, no more that.
Yeah, just
don't
so
say
they won't be
and
attacked.
almost just like proactively.
Yeah.
And is that like, how do you feel about some of those responses?
Yeah, that is an interesting response to many people. And we just have to remember that it only takes 3.5% of the population to change the course of history. And so in this time, we have a lot of people just giving in to the will of the bully. And most of the time, the bully is just talking. But it's confusing and concerning that so many institutions are bending to illegal and unconstitutional actions. Because once he does go to court, 9 times out of 10, he loses. Or he tries to reframe the conversation to make it appear as a win when it's not a win. And so what we have to do is be prepared to push back. We have to remind ourselves there's information and there's disinformation. And when the disinformation is coming from the largest bully pulpit in the world, it's difficult for us to glean through it unless you have courage. Perfect example is what happened in Iran. You know, he kept saying that there are these weapons of mass destruction. Oh, wait, that was George Bush, but he's using the same playbook. You start realizing there's been 2 or 3 weeks and we still haven't seen any evidence of them weakening their uranium enrichment facilities. But he said it was a massive win. Again, he is a master at media manipulation. But if you pull back the curtain, you start seeing that it's smoke and mirrors. I'll give you a final example. When he rolled back diversity, equity, inclusion, and a lot of these corporations decided that they were going to go in the same direction. Well, one of them is finding out in real time that that's not a good business model. You know, that company with the bullseye that's losing millions and millions of dollars. I think people need to understand that the power is still in the people, and we need to push back in real time. That was the message of the fierce urgency of now that was given in Charlotte, which will go out to the country through the NAACP.
I've seen that fear too. I feel like I saw it when we were talking about the arrest of the Newark mayor Baraka.
Yes,
whose
charges were dismissed.
Charges were dismissed. That's true. Now, most of us don't want to spend any time in jail.
But here's the thing. Everybody loves to talk about the 60s and what they would have done and how they would have responded. We're in the 60s right now.
We're here now.
100%. So Georgia was talked about as, I mean, we've been talking about voting, access to voting, and maybe this is just a bigger freedom of speech for, you know, a broader First Amendment conversation. But where does Georgia sit now with regard to access to the ballot, access to use your rights, use your voice, like anything since the last time we talked?
No, we're still in active litigation on SB 202, so it is harder to vote. But one thing we have become very good at is mobilizing the vote. Now, not so much for the Public Service Commission, which only had 1% turnout, and we're going to work harder to get turnout for November. There is a race in November that you need to make sure you understand that you got to vote. But going into the midterms, we're going to use the municipal races, which will be on the ballot in November, as a test run for the momentum that will build into 2026. And so I think people need to keep their eye focused on the ball. Remember how we responded in 2017 into 2018. We've had bigger protests now in 2024, 2025, leading into 2026. And so I feel the same groundswell of anger in the community. We literally just had John Lewis's protest, The Good Trouble Lives On, where we had 1,500 people in Atlanta on a Thursday marching through the streets. And there were over 300 protests around the country. And so you see that that anger that's building, that's mobilizing into organizations. We see legacy organizations coming out. We see the birth of new grassroots organizing. And so ultimately we will push that to the polls. But yes, in Georgia, it's more difficult to vote. But again, what do Black people do when you make something more difficult? We find a way to electric slide or boots on the ground right around it.
That's true. That's very true.
Candidates for governor.
Yes.
Oh, I've thoughts.
I think right now, the Democrats have to get their act together. I think that the front runner in the gubernatorial race is Burt Jones. And we're going to see a very expensive race, but we may see some other names come into fruition before we're over.
I was going to ask a question, but I'm not going to ask that because I don't want to put you in that position. Okay, so is protesting the strongest tool we still have? Or does it need to be a united front of protesting, trying to pass bills, things of that magnitude? Is
All
it a combined effort?
So you have to have all of the tools in your toolbox. Protest is a tool, voting is a tool, litigation and legislation is a tool, and then advocacy and education. We have to educate our people to understand we've been here before. This is not the most divided time in American history. They literally fought a war over being divided in 1850 to 1860. It started in 1850. But, and so we just need to understand we've been here before. We have to use the tools of our ancestors who had it far worse than we do, and we will win. So I think it's a tool. It's not the end all be all. Now it's fun. I mean, whenever you get to march with 1,500 people up to 30,000 people, it's always a good idea and a good fun to get in good trouble. But we also have to know that we have to continue to have mass meetings so we can strategize and make sure we have the appropriate response. We also have to engage in economic disturbance. We have $1.7 trillion in buying power. And so we can push back on these corporations who can then push back on the White House, because the biggest thing that the president of the United States focuses on is the stock market. Those stocks start going down because those corporations are losing money. He'll stop many of these antics. So we just have to understand we have the power, regardless of the disinformation that's on social media and the bowing that's happening with mainstream media outlets. The people still have the power. The people can drive the conversation. People can make change.
Are we still using the same avenues we used to? Like, church used to be really big, and you could have a lot of meetings at churches. I don't know if we still have that same lean into churches. Are we still using those?
A few years ago, I would say you're correct. But now with streaming, I'm seeing churches come back. I'm particularly seeing pastors become more of the voice, like Jamal Bryant and others who are leading this current iteration of economic disturbance. So I would push back a little bit on that. Now, we do have a lot of churches that are just sitting back idly by and not saying anything, acting as though their Lord and Savior wasn't an activist. So I just think that there's a mix, and we have to do a better job of my generation and the generation below us pushing them to be more than just talkers of the word. They need to be doers as well.
Well, also like when you have when you call a church meeting, I guess you could do it online.
Yeah, you can do it online.
You can do it online.
Yeah.
I guess that's the same thought process.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that works.
Yeah. And I was going to say, there's always, again, NAACP, there's a lot of membership-based organizations that do a lot of work as well. And even if it's not a formal advocacy organization, there's community boards, there's community councils. Atlanta has a whole bunch of them. I'm not in the city of Atlanta. I'm in Marietta, but Cobb County has them as well. There's always people organizing around. And I think it's something to be said about your county. What county are you in, Cobb?
I'm in DeKalb.
Oh, well. Either way.
I'm not happy about it, but I'm in DeKalb.
I had a quick reproductive justice question, and this is maybe for NAACP. Like, does NAACP taking on anything with reproductive justice at the moment or post-Dobbs? And we were talking about this with the Adriana Smith case in particular. Like, we're talking about women's rights maybe the most recently, but even just in general.
Yes, we are, but we allow our partners to take the lead. So we partner with Planned Parenthood. We partner with Black women's reproductive rights groups that are doing the heavy lifting. So we don't want to be as the singular out front organization, because that's not particularly all of our focus, but we do recognize that as a civil rights issue, and we want to add support and resources. So ACLU has filed lawsuits. I think they're filing a lawsuit in that case. And so we support those advocacy and legal organizations that are leading those charges.
Gotcha. Do you think this could be the beginning of a trend maybe outside of Georgia? Like more cases like Adriana Smith?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, with the abortion bans, you're going to see more and more of that because doctors are afraid to act. Especially in Georgia, if the fetus is viable after 6 weeks, you could be charged. And so you see large hospitals as well as individual doctors are afraid to provide health care that could save the life of the mother for fear of potentially taking the life of a viable fetus at that point. It's not quite a baby yet because it hadn't been born. But, Georgia law is interesting. It's developing. I saw the Attorney General issue an opinion in that case saying the heartbeat bill didn't apply. I don't know how he came up with that idea because if they took action and something happened to the fetus, he wouldn't be the one charging them anyway. It'd be the Fulton County District Attorney. So, we have to just drill down on a lot of this political doublespeak and get to the truth of the matter.
Two of the biggest misconceptions going around now. Like, what are two of the biggest misconceptions? Like, you keep peeling back things. What are two of the biggest misconceptions that's gonna that can stall us if we buy into the propaganda?
Yeah, believing everything you hear come out of a politician's mouth is one. Two, believing everything you see on the internet. We have to fact check. Now, your previous guest was talking about reading the Encyclopedia Britannica. I was a nerd, so that's what I did. I read World Book and Encyclopedia Britannica. What people need to understand is we have the most information ever of a generation.
Literally, they can type it in.
But we don't use it. Google is your friend. You can literally fact check a politician in real time. Everybody's using Chat GPT and all the other AI devices. You can literally fact check with the AI. It'll tell you in real time. Now, sometimes you got to fact check that. But so there's no reason why you don't know what a bill is going to do, what your elected official's position is on whatever the issue is, and how to hold them accountable. You can actually Chat GPT their phone number and their email address and send them messages. You don't have to come outside and march. I would hope you would come outside and march, but you don't have to. You could do all of those things, and you could be so socially conscious that you can affect change. Again, it only takes 3.5% of the community to change the world. I didn't say your community, I said the world. So imagine 1% getting socially and politically and civically active in a community like this to make change.
Can you dig into that more? When you say 3.5%, where is that?
So basically, there's a theory that in order to move movements, you only need 3.5% of the population to get active.
Okay.
In the civil rights movement, we got to about 7%. George Floyd, it was about 10. And so if you understand, if you're in a population like city of Atlanta, with 400,000 citizens live in the city of Atlanta, 10% is 40,000. I'm a lawyer, so I'm not good at math, but 40,000. We've had marches way bigger than that. And so if you understand that I don't have to influence everybody, I just need to influence 1 out of my 10 friends, 2 out of my 10 friends, maybe even 3. 3 out of my 10 friends, that's 30%. 1, 10%. So now I'm at 0.5% of my friends, which you don't have a half a friend, but you're starting to get what I'm saying. So instead of us focused on trying to influence the entire country, that's 330 million people, why don't we just influence 7 million? Oh, wait, that was the protest on April the 5th. Oh, wait, that was the protest 2 days ago. And so when you start looking at social media and you drill down to searching the hands-off protest or the good trouble lives on, you start seeing that the same movement that was present for George Floyd, same movement for Ahmaud Arbery is building again the same way it built in 2017. And so I think people just need to understand they got to get actively engaged.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean,
what were you going to say? It looked like you had something right there.
I was pondering, but then carry on what you got.
Okay, public, because I want to talk about public safety a little bit, and I just want to ask more because we talked about Cop City a lot for quite some time. I know that I think the last time I heard anything about Cop City, there's basically I think a call for the foundation, APF, the Atlanta Police Foundation, to release records or release information, and they hadn't done it, and I think that they're still being asked to release some of the information. Is this something that NAACP, other advocates are still working on, trying to work around, or are there bigger public safety battles to fight right now?
I think there are bigger public safety battles to fight. Now, I think that the attempt to stop the Public Safety Training Center was a noble attempt, but I think they failed to realize that there were 15 other public safety training centers that were being built at the same time around the metro area.
Really?
Yes. And so what we have to do is to inform the accountability of these law enforcement officers who run afoul of the public trust. There was a story that went out about 2 weeks ago. Gerald Rolfe, the officer who killed Rayshard Brooks, is now back on paid administrative leave for another incident that happened in the city of Atlanta. It's not allowing that to continue. An officer to allegedly end the life of another citizen and then get rehired to be put in the same situation. So we at the NAACP recognize that after George Floyd, there's been consistently 1,000 American citizens killed every year. Last year was the most violent. 1,200 citizens have been killed by law enforcement. We saw what just happened in the Breonna Taylor case yesterday, where the officer who was never charged for the killing of Breonna Taylor was charged for another issue. The Department of Justice is now recommending 1 day in jail.
1 day. I was like, are you serious?
So this is why it's important to make sure we not only focus at the top of the ticket, but we focus on all the way around, because once you lose a presidency and you lose a Congress and you're trending on losing the Supreme Court, you can see departments like this push back on the gains that were made because of the biggest protest in American history, George Floyd protests. So we're focused on that. We're focused on a hyper local and state level because we cannot affect federal policy yet. We can sue in federal court. 1983 claims are still very much alive. 1981 claims, those civil rights claims based on the violation of civil rights protections by law enforcement. If you read the book, The Color of Law, it tells all about that. But, mainly on a policy standpoint, we've shifted from trying to stop the Public Safety Training Center to holding law enforcement officers accountable one case at a time when they violate the public trust.
When we sue in like federal court, how long does it take? How long do those cases take?
It can take anywhere from a year to a decade. It just depends on how quickly the judge is moving their docket. Most of them don't end in a trial, they end in a settlement. That's where you hear all these announcements of settlements. I think recently there was a settlement in Denver and a couple in Florida by different civil rights attorneys. But most of the time, they end in those settlements. The problem with losing the Department of Justice is there no longer going to be consent decrees where police departments enter into a consent agreement to be monitored by the federal court to make policy changes. That happened with the withdrawal of the consent decree in Minnesota, the withdrawal of the consent decree in Kentucky, the withdrawal of the consent decree in Memphis. And so we have to watch that. And that's why it was important to not lose the Department of Justice. But now we have to do it state by state.
The situation happened in Miami where they took it upon themselves to move the elections to next year. I feel like that was a test and trial that if they pull that off and nobody says anything, could that be a trend?
Well, I mean, you always have to look around the country at potential trends of voter disenfranchisement. I think that if it made it to the Supreme Court, and that's the hard part of getting it to the Supreme Court before the next election, because you have certain cases, Muriel is one of them, and I think that's the name of the case, that say you cannot have federal action within 6 months of an election. So we have to move these cases. But it potentially could be a situation where, because of what happened in Shelby County versus Holder and the gutting of the pre-clearance clause of the Voting Rights Act, that you would see states do things like this that clearly run afoul of civil rights and voting rights. But we are hopeful. There have been several voting rights case wins in the South. And so I'm sure that the Florida State Conference is looking at that case and will probably file a lawsuit in that case, but it's going to take a while to get litigated all the way up.
I didn't think that was legal. The fact they were able to do that really shocked me. I was like,
Well, it's not illegal until a court says it's illegal, and you got to get it in the court.
Makes sense. That makes sense. A couple other things. I don't know how you felt about this state legislative session, but I did want to just kind of ask you about it in general, because we talked about it a lot, but I also felt like we didn't talk about enough. We talked about education quite a bit. We also spent some time talking about wrongfully convicted people's compensation, right? And what that process looks like in Georgia, which I think it's a mess all over the South. But I was curious about your thoughts about it, because I know that's a long, long, long fight. Mm-hmm. And I felt like there were mixed feelings about the bill, at least at first.
Yeah.
So definitely would love to know what you think about that. And I don't know if people also understand the state of our prisons, but I think that that's a good, if they don't, I think that's an important precursor to this, because people don't spend a lot of time thinking about prison maybe outside of this space, or if you don't have a loved one, if you've never been directly impacted yourself. But Georgia has some of the most dangerous and the most deadly prisons in this country, and it has only gotten worse. And in particular, our process for wrongfully convicted people, right, it was a very like case by case situation in which a person could ever hope to have any sort of, again, compensation, any sort of recourse. And it had to essentially come from their own hands. And I think their ability to find an attorney and go through that entire process. In the state of Mississippi, people actually have to go before the legislature and like request an amount. The legislature gets to determine that. It's a mess. So this bill, I think, was meant to address that, right? But was that all there was to it? Was that something NAACP supported at the state level?
Well, no, simply because the genesis of the bill had to do with the election interference case.
Gotcha.
And so, you know, when we look at that bill, and I do agree with, you know, the fact that inmates who've been wrongly convicted and now returning citizens should be able to sue and should be able to get monetary damages for being wrongfully incarcerated. So I agree with, you know, the rationale of the bill. You know, it's very hard to get compensated in Georgia if you've been wrongfully convicted.
Right.
And so we will be using this as a tool. But the underlying genesis of this was the election interference case, which is still pending. And the belief from some people in the Republican Party that Donald Trump should be able to recover his lawyer fees for this particular case. And I would remind them, the case is not over. Even in that bill, you have to be exonerated, and then you can recoup those lost fees and those damages. So I think overall it's a good bill. I just don't like where it came from.
Gotcha.
So they passed about 100 new laws in Georgia. Any of them concern you? Not
really. It was very quiet legislative session. We defeated the diversity, equity, inclusion ban in Georgia. There were a few slightly bad bills that got through, but nothing that, you know, put your hair on fire, like the 6 weeks abortion ban. There was no transgender ban in Georgia. One thing we've gotten good at in Georgia is how to play strong defense in the legislative session. Now, there were a couple that slipped my mind that at the time are bad, but not horrendously bad to take us back to something like if we lived in Florida. No shade to Florida, but y'all governor's crazy.
Yeah, to Satan.
You know, and so I think now going into a gubernatorial race, I think you're probably going to see some red meat thrown to the base on the Republican side to get them to turn out. I've already heard the leading candidate on the Republican side talk about ending state income tax. Don't know how they're going to pay for that.
And Georgia too, right?
Yeah. So I don't know how you pay for that. I know we have a $12 billion surplus, which I don't understand why you have a surplus if you don't have adequate funding of your educational and your healthcare and, you know, investment in businesses. I don't know how you have a surplus, but they say in Georgia, #1 place for business, but dead last for workers. And so I think we're going to see that. We already see the fight going on in the Democratic side between Keisha Lance Bottoms, former mayor of the city of Atlanta, and State Senator Jason Estevez. I hear other people are joining the race. Olu Brown is in the race. There's some whispers about Mike Thurman joining the race. Who else?
Derrick Jackson.
Of course, Derrick Jackson, State Representative Derrick Jackson. So there's a lot of conversation, and I think you'll see a vetting of the candidates going forward. But currently, there's no horrendous legislation that went through in last year's session.
That's okay. That makes me feel, because we talked about this and I was almost looking for it. It was the divisive topics bill from 3 sessions ago. That made me, so I was looking for a lot like that because I felt there was a lot of conversation. And in Cobb County, there'd been so many changes and more books banned, but I didn't see any of that this session. So that's helpful to hear too. However, some of the stuff that did happen may have been things we didn't have in the first place, like us talking about how we treat trans youth and, you know, their ability to play sports and just get a safe education. we don't have a safe place for trans people in general. So I think that wasn't considered to be as maybe as shocking. But I'm still curious about how you felt for our responses to some of the federal work that was coming down. And I know that recently the DOJ has requested voter rolls, like wanting a handful of states to submit their voter rolls. I also know that when the funding was slashed, and this was early on in Trump's administration, one of the first things that got called into question was like community violence prevention programs and all the programs that are targeted to like youth and to cities. And then I know the city of Philadelphia uses and other cities just focusing on, again, like gun violence prevention, which are really important, and safety programs, which I think were considered neutral criminal justice policies. I thought they were. Do you have any thoughts about about Georgia, about the city of Atlanta with regard to safety? And I'll add recently in conversation with the city of Atlanta, we learned that there was no extra money for public safety programming, that they said that they didn't have the budget for it. And I was like, how do we not have the budget for it?
Surplus.
In Baltimore, when I was on a work trip, the first thing that came on the local TV was Real Murders of Atlanta, which is a show I'd never even heard of the show before.
Real Murders.
And there's 2 Real Murders of Atlanta shows in pretty recent history, like 2022, 2023 murders with former sitting. I'd never heard of it. And I'm like, oh my God. But we have no public safety funding.
Well, so here's the thing. Crime is down in the city of Atlanta.
Fair.
Crime is down in the state of Georgia.
Fair.
And there are media outlets that want to perpetuate a certain narrative. I think there was 102 homicides last year, something like that.
Fair.
I'm from Atlanta when there were 400. And so I can understand why there's a certain narrative. I mean, of course, this city disproportionately has more cameras and more production companies than any place outside of California, and fear sells.
Yeah.
And so what I would just simply say is, with crime being down, with violent crime being down, there needs to be more investment in community-oriented policing and reinvestment in public safety that's not carceral. And so I think that's not sexy enough to make the evening news or make podcasts or get made by TV One or BET Plus or whoever's making Real Murders of Atlanta. But I would strongly urge people to go down to the Fulton County Courthouse and watch trials. You don't have an exorbitant amount of murder cases.
True.
Now, you do have a lot of RICO cases.
Yeah, which is
a lot of cases, period.
You know, Fonnie loves RICO. So, you know,
the
you see a
model
lot
of
of
municipal court, though, is tragic. Like, we're the busiest court in the country.
Southeast.
You think that's a good thing?
The busiest court in the Southeast.
That's a good thing.
Yeah,
okay.
well, to them, collecting ticket fees is a good thing. But I think ultimately what we are seeing with the shift in media consumption is people pushing back on this, you know, if it bleeds, it leads.
Sure.
You know, you don't see a whole lot of social media posts about rampant crime in Atlanta unless you're watching ATO Scoop. But it's not as prevalent as you would think. And you have to remember, you have Atlanta and then you have Metro Atlanta.
Yeah.
Sure.
Atlanta only has 400,000 people. Metro Atlanta has 7.4 million. So if we are watching the nightly news and we see one murder every day on the nightly news out of 7.4 million people, that's not a lot of murder. The last FBI crime statistics said that there are 14,000 homicides in the United States every year. The United States has 330 million people.
Yeah.
People are not killing each other back and forth. Okay, not the Wild West. And so I think that politicians and media corporations want to push this thought of fear.
Sure.
And so they focus on suburban and urban communities about this narrative of crime. But as soon as an election cycle is over, we're the safest place in the world. So, you know, the short answer to your question is the issue of public safety are the jails and the prisons. Georgia has some of the most violent prisons you would ever. I mean, I get calls. Now, that's what they need to be putting on the news.
Yeah.
There are stabbings and killings that are going on in jails and prisons daily. Down in Macon, I was down there, toured that facility. That's one of the worst jails I've ever seen. It looks like something between a mix between Shawshank Redemption and Alcatraz.
It's that bad?
It makes Shawshank look orderly.
It's dark. It's dank. There's feces and stuff all on the ground. People are getting stabbed every day. Down in Macon. It's worse than Fulton County, and Fulton County is pretty bad. And then you have the jails. I mean, it's the prisons. I mean, it took an order from our senator to get an investigation into the federal prison system here in the state of Georgia. Mm-hmm. Also, the governor has now signed a bill to allocate more funding to refurbish Georgia's prisons because of the pandemic of violence. So that's something that people are not talking enough about. If we're going to talk about public safety, we got to talk about returning citizens and incarcerated citizens that should be able to go and serve their sentence and come back home alive.
100%.
And that's not happening in a lot of cases. I'm glad y'all brought that up.
Completely. Smith State Prison. I mean, so many prisons. And also I think what's important about this is, for one thing, corrections are expensive. So like the money is spent. But the violence is out of control. And as much as I feel like I hear a lot of conversations on, of course, national news about Rikers Island in particular, and especially this year, the protests and the walkouts that were happening by correctional officers up there because of Robert Brooks, who a lot of folks have heard of, but he was essentially a man who was killed by prison officials, by corrections officers. However, we have more murders or more deaths, whether they're known or unknown or suspicious reasons or unstated reasons in Cobb County than we had in Rikers Island for the last several years.
Really?
Just the Cobb County jail, where people are still legally innocent for the most part. I mean, it's incredibly dangerous.
I mean, is there a checks and balances for jails? It's not something I actually thought about.
No, I mean, the sheriff runs the jail. He or she is charged with the health and well-being and general welfare of all of the incarcerated citizens. And like she said, 95% of the people that are in a pretrial detention facility have not been convicted of a crime. So they are citizens that have all their constitutional rights. They are not surviving these encounters, shanks, guard violence, all kinds of conditions, like what happened in Fulton County Jail with the scabies and the lice and the bed bugs and all those things. These things are happening. Dehydration and malnutrition and not getting proper medical treatment. And so these things are happening and nobody's really talking about it until there's, a case like to LaShawn Thompson, where you had the bed bug situation. But they're happening all over the state of Georgia, particularly Macon is number one. And so we just got to continue to lift up those families that are dealing with this. There's an organization called Inmates Lives Matter that has been on the front lines of this, pushing for accountability. But no, mainly the sheriff is the only one that is in charge of the well-being of these civilians that are incarcerated. And there was a Senate panel to investigate the Fulton County Jail, but that was for a whole nother reason, because Trump had been in the Fulton County Jail and he got a chance to see the inside of the Fulton County Jail, even though it's just the hallway and the booking facility. Right-wing media ran wild with that. But this is a condition that's pervasive throughout the state of Georgia for our pretrial and our post-trial detention facilities.
So we're saying that people, because there's prison in their jail. Prison is kind of where people expect to hear that kind of stuff. We don't necessarily.
Well, you shouldn't expect to hear any of it anywhere.
Well, I know. Yeah. But I'm just saying, in our day pass, if it doesn't directly affect you, then you think about prisons. But we're talking about jails where people are just kind of temporarily passing through and they're not surviving.
Not surviving, getting stabbed, getting shanked, getting severely injured, having medical emergencies, and not surviving the incarceration portion of their stay there.
Yeah. Jesus, and again, no one's serving a sentence, even in state prison, no matter what the state prison is serving a death sentence.
Except for the people at Jackson, but that's
even still,
it's only
not at the hands of another,
50 of them.
Not at the hands of another inmate.
Yeah.
Okay, that's concerning. I didn't even know. Like you said, nobody talks about that, so it's not even if it doesn't directly affect you, like you don't think about it.
What do you? The staffing crisis, which is the only term I've heard used by the commissioner or anyone else who's trying to address this, is saying we just had a staffing crisis. It sounds like a heck of a lot more than just a staffing crisis to me.
It's a culture of violence problem that's happening. See, what happened was when they passed the laws to criminalize criminal street gangs, and they started labeling everybody a criminal street gang, some people started buying into that label and they became criminal street gangs. And so if you're going to criminalize them and send them all to one or two places, you're going to have breeding ground for criminal street gangs. And so the criminal street gangs run the facilities. Yeah. But when we talk about this staffing crisis, I mean, the average correctional officer only makes $35,000 to $40,000. If you have 500 inmates in one pod and one security officer, they're not in control of the pod. They just stay on the outside and just make sure that, not too many people get killed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a real conversation of how we raise the standard of living for individuals who go into correctional careers to make sure that they have the ability to make a better life. And now you have more people there to help a correctional facility to, correct certain behavior and allow the citizens to return. So I think that's one of the solutions to that.
We definitely don't compare. I don't know what a chart would look like, but I'll just end with like the transparency part. I don't think there's a harder bills that I've worked on in this state than transparency types of bills. Anything that requires transparency, whether it's like outside folks being a part of, like going inside more often, whether it's cameras, whether it's reporting. Transparency is like the hardest thing to push for. And there's so much like uphill battle against the department, against GDC when it comes to just having more transparency into prisons and the money that they want to spend. And I think even this most recent increase, part of that increase includes to focus more on contraband. But if it were not for contraband, a lot of us would not even know what was going on. Because we rely on TikTok and on people getting their hands on phones to show some of what is going on. And they make their way to social media platforms. And that's how I've been able to see in some facilities just how bad it is. You mentioned Inmates Lives Matter for sure. They Have No Voice is another really, really big group in Georgia. And I think there's a Georgia specific chapter of it. But it's an online community where it's lots of loved ones and people sharing information. Those are the only places that a lot of this stuff gets out. Otherwise, it doesn't become public knowledge.
Yeah, this is new to me.
And I mean, that's how we got the information. Well, that and the Macon, Bibb County NAACP, how we got the information on the Macon, Bibb County detention facility, because they were sharing videos of the inside. And again, I don't know how they get phones into the jail, because even lawyers can't take phones into the jail. So it's only one other way to get the phone in the jail. And then you get phone calls from the prison, and it's really interesting to watch the prison fashion shows and the food that's going on down there. And I mean, they had a whole basketball league in one of the prisons, and I was interested in how they built the basketball court and were playing in those flip-flops. But, these are all things we're seeing because of social media, because of the rise of the internet that we would otherwise not know about.
For sure.
The closing of Job Corps.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
I just think that people really don't understand how peeling away these social safety nets are going to affect the fabric of our community. We talk about, crime and violence and all these things. And again, that's only one portion of 1% of our citizens. But if you don't have pathways out, like Job Corps is a pathway out for underserved communities, what do you expect is going to happen?
Literally.
And so to give this tax cut to the very wealthy, but cut all of these programs that were benefiting the community. I mean, I'm hearing story after story of how Job Corps helped save people and put them on a different path. And now to see, they just shuttered them. And I don't think that the American people, especially the people here in Georgia, fully appreciate what these effects are going to have over the next 6 months to 2 years. You're going to start seeing that picture of America that Donald Trump gave on his inauguration day come true. We're going to see American carnage if we keep on going down this path.
Agree.
I mean, what can we do?
Other than organize these individuals who are no longer in Job Corps, get them together. Let's all visit a handful of communities. Let's all visit a handful of communities.
Well, the solution is state-based and local community organization. And so it's time for our state government or our local government to fill the gap. I think in Maryland, for the federal workers that were laid off, the governor of Maryland opened up state level departments to feed those experts in. And I think we can do the same thing here in the state of Georgia. So hopefully any of the gubernatorial candidates are running this as an idea you could steal. You could open state level departments that could be funded by the surplus to make sure these services don't go neglected in the state of Georgia, and Georgia can continue to grow as we see the recession of the national government. You know, for these states' rights people who love to run around here talking about states' rights, if you don't have the programming set up, the federal government provides a lot of services to the state, more so to the red states than it does the blue states. So, you know, if that federal bureaucracy is going to be lessened, you're going to have to increase the state and local bureaucracy to fill those gaps, because the people aren't just going to magically disappear.
Exactly.
The people that have those needs aren't going away. And so you need to take care of them on the front end, otherwise you're going to take care of them on the back.
What does that look like?
That's a good question. It's going to look like substantial investment in people and infrastructure to build this new pathway of government. And so I don't know what it looks like. I know that we got to get up to speed before 26. Because again,
it's going to require actual investment, though.
I agree.
It's like a steep investment,
and that's why it's good to have a surplus.
Right? So that should be fine,
really
right?
a surplus?
There's really a surplus.
Yeah.
There's really a $12 billion surplus.
That's just sitting there.
Just sitting there. And I don't understand
Just cutting anyway.
Why people don't recognize that government is not a business. Government exists to service the people. So if there's a surplus, that means there are surplus funds that you've already taken from the taxpayer to provide for the citizens. So you can either do one or two things with that money. You can spend it on services, or you can give it back to the taxpayer. So, I mean, if you're a conservative, you shouldn't be sitting on the surplus. You should be either reinvesting it into services or giving it back to the people that paid it.
So when we talk about a surplus, we're talking about unallocated money.
Unallocated money that's sitting in interest-bearing loan accounts, interest-bearing accounts. They're just making interest off the money.
It's like the equivalent of of having like a medical emergency, but you just decide, you know what, I have a savings. I'm not going to touch that. I'm just not going to pay rent, and we're just going to have to deal with it. And I'm just because I'm not going to touch my savings. But you literally having a medical emergency. Yeah.
Or you may not just touch your savings or touch your money. You just might just sit there and die because you're not going to get the medical treatment. It makes no sense. And so when we talk about this ideology that we're not going to reinvest or spend the money on what's needed, because again, we're like 47th in education, but you're over talking about a surplus. We have no level 1 trauma centers throughout most of the state of Georgia, particularly in the cradle of the state, Atlanta, but you're talking about a surplus. So I think we really have to rethink how we allow these politicians to frame these conversations.
Would it be better if we had a Democratic governor?
I'm not sure. I think it would be better if we had a governor that cares, a governor that sees the entire state, a governor who burns up the road in his car all the time, making sure that South Georgia gets the same resources as North Georgia. And so whoever that governor is, whoever he or she may be, needs to stop spending time on their phone talking about their hair and actually focus on getting out to the community and seeing what the community needs.
I keep dancing around this because I really want to ask you, but I can't. Do you have any faith, in the candidates on the gubernatorial race that are currently in the pool? Do you have any faith on the Democratic side? Do you have any faith in any of them? Honestly.
Not the announced candidates. And I like a few of them. Some of them are my good friends, but I don't think they fully appreciate the size of this state, the complexity of this state, the needs of the people. And I think they need to spend a little bit more time outside of Metro Atlanta having a conversation. They need to go up into the mountains, whether that's White County or up in Rome, Floyd, or go down to Lowndes or go over to Doherty, and just spend some time talking to the people, because they'll find out that most of the people in Georgia feel like there's a bias towards Atlanta.
I mean, that's kind of obvious.
And they take that very seriously. So if you're running for their vote, they want to hear what you're going to do in their community. And so I'm not sure on the Democratic side, or even on the Republican side for that matter, there's a central candidate that fully understands what Georgia really looks like. Georgia is not a red state. It's not a blue state. It's a black state. And so as the black people go in this state, goes the state. Now, that's not to say that there aren't white people of good conscience and our Latino brothers and sisters and our Asian population, But this is a former slave state whose sons and daughters of those slaves have charted the course for this state ever since it was a penal colony. And so I don't know if there's a politician that fully appreciates that Georgia is different from Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Florida. It's certain things that just won't happen in Georgia.
That part. And
I think that when you tap into that history and understand where Georgia is on the spectrum, I think that there needs to be a candidate, a transformational candidate, sort of like an Obama type candidate that pulls Georgia together. And so there are a few people that are sitting on the sidelines that could have that impact. You know, one is hinting at a race, entering the race. The other, you know, I'm not sure where she falls on this category if she wants to run again. And then there's maybe one or two out there who y'all haven't thought about.
I really want to push this, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to push. I'm not going to push it. Final thoughts.
My final thoughts are: we are in a historical moment in Georgia, a historical moment in the country, and our courage won't skip this generation. I think many people talk about what they would have done in the civil rights movement or some other time, and they're lying to themselves because you're sitting at home not doing anything right now. And so when you see a threat to our democracy, whether that's foreign or domestic, you have an absolute right as a American citizen to call it out. You know, John Lewis always said, when you see something that's wrong, you need to say something. You need to do something. You need to get in some good and necessary trouble. Well, our dear brother John is not coming back. He's very comfortable where he is.
I'm sure.
And I'm pretty sure there's no pain. And we need to understand that the time is now for our generation, because our grandchildren are going to say what we did in this moment. And so as for me, I think that we will rise to the occasion and we will chart a new way forward. And I'm excited to be a part of that.
Sure. Final thought?
Raise taxes on the top 5%. That's my final thought. It means universal pre-K. Free community college.
I like that. Universal pre-K.
Raise taxes on top 5%.
Shout out to Deuce. Universal pre-K, brother.
This is clearly going to be happening in the multiverse, because it's probably not going to happen in this universe. It's going to happen in the multiverse. Final thoughts is get active, like you like to say. Get active. Whatever that looks like, whether that's in your direct circle, so sphere, or whether that's in a community space. Get active. Special thanks to our friend of the show, Attorney Griggs. Thank you for coming back. And we will see you same time, same place on the Leadership in Live podcast with your host, Ricardo D. Rice, and co-host
Simone Cherie.